Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good afternoon, friends. I am in a sensational mood, but I can tell you my week did not start out great, and that's an understatement. So I'm going to get really personal with you and share something that happened to me this week. And share for a couple of reasons. One, I do know that sometimes when you invite people into your life, they do like that, they enjoy that, but that's not the main reason. I want to just talk to you about the special type of community we have here that I oftentimes refer to as our listening family. Sure, we share a mission, trying to make college knowledge available to all, but we have a special family. So when I got back from California, you guys know I was there for 26 days, right? September 7th to October 3rd. Well, the mail stacks up and it takes a few more days to get to the mail. So I finally go grab my mail. Now, this is never good. You never want to reach out and see an envelope from the IRS. I'm fortunate I've never been audited, but I have had them reach out and seek clarification. I've heard the stories. So I open this envelope, and let me just get right to the upshot. It's trying to say I owe them over $20,000. Now it says this is not a bill, but we think you owe us over $20,000. And, your heart's racing a bit. And so then I start reading further, and the notice is sent on September 3rd. But of course, remember, I'm gone September 7th, so who knows when I got it. And then it says, if you must respond by October 3rd, or this has now moved to become a bill that you have to pay. And I'm reading this on whatever Columbus Day was. So I immediately try to call them. They're closed. I call the next day. I'm on hold for 90 minutes, maybe even close to 100 minutes. And then it says call cannot be completed as dot. Okay, now I'm like, all right, what am I going to do here? I start reading the document a little more closely. It's basically saying that they're accusing me of underreporting my 2022 returns, and then they just have crazy fees on top of it. I mean, just crazy fees. Like an underreporting fee alone was almost $4,000, and there was interest, there's all this stuff. And I try to reach my tax accountant because I really go by the books. I pay everything. I'm very meticulous about this. I can't reach her. I start thinking, okay, what I'm going to do? Well, there's an attorney, and I'm not going to put his last name out there, but his first name is John in New Jersey. And he's someone I've gotten to know a little bit. He's a regular podcast listener. And you may remember once before I shared something on here about how I did get a lawsuit for using some copyrighted images from Google Images that the Associated Press hired a law firm, which was not fun. And so had to handle that. There was a settlement, had to pay thousands of dollars, but paid less than half of what they originally asked for. Learn to never, by the way, don't grab a Google image and use it as a photo. You never know. Anyway, he had reached out to me after that. He said, listen, because I shared that story on here. He said, if anything ever like that ever happens to again, reach out to me. I thought that was so kind of him. So I'm like, I'm in a dilemma. Let me reach out to him. He was incredibly helpful, incredibly helpful. And then all of a sudden, I got a text from another podcast listener. So that's a regular podcast listener in New Jersey. I get a text from another podcast listener. You may remember I said the last couple of weeks of October is kind of like an accountant. Coming up to April 15th, I got a text from another podcast listener I've gotten to know. in the last several years. And he's like, Mark, actually our busiest time a lot of times is like September, October, because all these people file extensions and I'm like, Matt, I'm going to ask Matt because he's an accountant. So I reach out, to make a long story short, Matt asked me to send him everything, look at everything, send it over to him. My wife and I had to give him power of attorney, and we really trust him, so we were happy to do that. I'll make a long story short. He found an IRS error in there, thousands of dollars of an IRS error. There was also an error that my accountant had made. To make a long story short, I owe $5,900 instead of over $20,000. I've never been so happy in my life to pay $5,900 versus more than $20,000. But why do I share this story with you? 2 members of our listening family, one an attorney, one an accountant, one in New Jersey, one in Florida. They made life so much easier for me and my family because of their kindness. And that's the kind of special community that we have here. And I just wanted to give a shout out to them. If anybody's looking for an attorney or an accountant, reach out to me. I'd be very, very happy to tell you about both of these fine young men. So that's like one reason I'm in a great mood. The other reason I'm in a great mood is because you may remember a week or two ago, I was talking about the NACAC conference, and I said, you guys might want to go to Columbus next year if you really love this stuff. Because not only do you get incredible conferences, meet amazing people, but they've made the on-demand package so much better. Where now, it used to be about 30 days. Now it's like 3 months. You get access to there's like 115 sessions. So now I'm in there and I'm like a kid in the candy store. It is incredible. I'm all in, and you're going to be the beneficiary of it because I'm going to be bringing you a lot of this content over the next several months, and particularly in the Monday sessions. I'm loving life, being immersed in 115 sessions when I could only really attend about 6 because you only be at one place at one time. So I'm super pumped and jazzed about that. All right. So today I am going to share with you in my opinion, was the single biggest overarching theme from the conference. And it also is a trend. And I think it's something of interest to you guys. It's not something we haven't discussed before, but hopefully we'll come at it from a few new angles. You'll learn a few new things. I never, ever, ever, ever want anybody to listen to our podcast. I don't care if you've been doing this 50 years and not come away and learning. But I'm going to share that with you. And then, we will have Aaron is back, and Aaron Wolf from Bucknell, Director of Financial Aid. We're through the 18 reasons why college aid offers are all over the place. But we're just going to talk about several different things about money. And to tell you the truth, you're going to hear from Aaron in the first segment and the second segment because I recorded something on the side with Aaron that relates to our first segment. So you'll be hearing from Aaron Wolf both in my NACAC takeaway as well as in our interview. So hopefully you guys will enjoy it. It's an important conversation, and let's dive in. So the topic I want to talk to you guys about, the single biggest overarching theme, and it's not like they said, hey, here's the single biggest overarching theme. It's just my assessment, distilling and putting everything together. What was the thing I heard over and over and over and over again? Session after session, conversation after conversation. And it's simply this, that college is under assault. Colleges are struggling because of a confluence of what I want to say 7 factors coming at college all at once. And let's talk about those 7. So the first is the enrollment cliff. The enrollment cliff. Now, if you're, not new to our podcast, you have heard about the enrollment cliff. College enrollment is down 1.23 million students from the pandemic. So what is the enrollment cliff? There's expected to be a 15% drop in freshmen beginning with the class of 2025. The enrollment cliff is AKA, also known as the birth dearth, because the cause is simple. You can just look at the birth rate at any given year, project out 18, 19, 20, 21 years when high school students would be in college, and you can see what is the eligible pool of potential college students. And this happens all the time. Anytime there are financial woes, people have less babies, less kids. And so this has been a hot topic for a long time. I've been going to these conferences for a long time. So back in 2016, 2017, all the buzz was on Nathan Graw, who's an economist at Carleton University, and he's considered the foremost expert on this topic. But he came out with a book called Demographics and the Demand for Higher Education. In fact, it was the 2017 National Student Clearinghouse Research Center Book Award winner. And then more recently in 2021, Nathan Graw came out with another book called The Agile College. But it's just looking at the drop-off and what's going to happen. So regional public colleges are expected to lose 11% of students by 2029. Community colleges equally under attack. In fact, the only thing kind of saving community colleges a little bit is the increase in dual credit or dual enrollment students is so high. But they're still really, really struggling. Now, the thing about this enrollment cliff is it's not equally dispersed everywhere in the country. It has very serious and significant regional impact. So almost all the states in the Northeast are experiencing birth declines, birth dearth, hence enrollment cliff. And almost all the states in the Midwest. It's certainly true for your states like your Kansases and your Nebraskas, your upper Midwest states like your Wisconsins and your Minnesotas, and your lower Midwest states. And huge parts of the South. Like people always hear, I thought the South was immune from this. No, huge parts of the South. And also parts of the West. So in the South, places like Alabama, Louisiana, Arkansas, you see it in Oklahoma, you see it in Tennessee, and even states on toward the West like Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. Some of these states are down as much as 15%. But then there are some other states where it's looking quite good. Texas looks really good. Florida looks really good. Georgia looks really good. South Carolina looks great. South Carolina's going to have a growth. California looks good. 2% growth projected in some states. And then some of the mountain states as well. Some of the mountain states are really bad and some are really good. You're seeing really good numbers out of Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah, but not so much in the Dakotas right now. So it's different and has different disparate impact according to the location. Also, certain colleges. I know what some of you are thinking. Stuck, did you just list Arizona, New Mexico, and others as experiencing less births? That's not true. These are growing states. But the numbers not only look at the birth rates, they look at the college going rate. Some of the states in the West, particularly those with high Latino populations like New Mexico and Arizona, have lower college enrollment rates. But on top of this, the news gets even worse. I learned something at NACAC I didn't know, and it makes sense. There's about to be another enrollment cliff in 2040, and this one is much more precipitous than the one in 2025. Remember, friends, you know this stuff in advance. You can just look at birth rates, and then you can project out 18 to 22 years later. Well, there were less kids during COVID. So that means fast forward 18 to 22 years, colleges got to figure out what they're going to do about that. But that's 15 years from now, but it looks really, really daunting. But for now, they face a big enough challenge over the next few years. Elite schools are expected to have a 14% increase by 2029, as far as how the enrollment cliff or the demographic cliff or the birth dearth is going to impact them. But the bottom line is if you're a college and you have less students to pick from and select from, you have a problem. You got to get beds and heads. You got to pay bills. So that's one thing, all right? But it's all of these 7 factors at once coming together. So another one, and this one may or may not happen, but it's certainly on the radar. It's certainly a concern, and that is there's threats out there to abolish the Department of Education. There's talk of very unfriendly policies towards student loan forgiveness, and there's the concern about international applicants going down like they did previously in the past. And some of that will depend on the national perception of who's in charge in this country and what the mindset is internationally toward whoever is in charge. So there's concerns about how the election plays out. Another factor, and it's a really big one, is the devaluation of colleges. in the eyes of the public. The perception it's not worth it. And I went to several sessions on this. One session I went to was a really good session. It was put on by NACAC leadership. In fact, there's such good stuff in that session. I'm going to be really drawing heavily from that in some of the future information that I'm going to come and bring to you. But at the very, very end of that session, and this is put on by Murphy Miller and Cameron Hare, two leaders at NACAC who work for NACAC. But at the very end of the session, somebody came forward and said, look, I'm at a high school with 3,000 kids. I just need you to give me tools because the single biggest concern I face is students coming up to me and saying, it's not worth it. I can go get a job. There's the perception out there that going to college, all it's going to mean is you're not going to get a good job and you're going to have a lot of debt and you would have wasted several years of your life. Now, this is not everywhere, but this is way more widespread than it used to be. There's talk of people saying, I can just become a TikTok sensation. I can get 100,000 followers right away and go get my brand deals. Why do I need all that? I went to another session talking about the messages being put out by companies. We don't need college grads anymore. The message is being put out by governments. We're hiring positions without needing a college degree anymore. And the session went on to say, most of the people telling you that have college degrees, but they're putting that out there. And they said it doesn't hurt the stat that shows that more than 50% of people are working in a job or they didn't need their college degree to have the job. So the constant assault. College isn't worth it. It's just coming at people. And especially the public school counselors there, they were just pleading with people. At one point, one person said, I need tools. I need resources. Do you have anything that you have prepared that I can go back and show my students that it is worth it? So we've covered 3 so far. The 4th is just the cost of college. The cost of college is rising so astronomically. People are like, I can't do it. I can't do it. It's rising faster than the cost of inflation. It's rising fast. I mean, healthcare and college costs way ahead of the increase in pay that people are getting. And then another one is, and I'll hear this sometimes, it's just sort of the fear of economic uncertainty. It's not quite as bad right now because right now inflation is looks like it's going down. But boy, it was bad when inflation was high and the potential of a looming recession. And then sometimes you'll hear people say, I'm not sure if I'm going to have a job with the AI anymore. So the fear of economic uncertainty. The 6th thing coming at people all at once is what I'm calling FAFSA fiasco. FAFSA fiasco. So we know it was a debacle, the rollout of the FAFSA. We know there were massive delays, and it really impacted FAFSA completion rates. So the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. If you don't complete the FAFSA, several things are not going to happen. You're not eligible for the free money from the federal government. Okay, FSEOG money, Pell Grant money, some state grants, you're not eligible for that. You're not eligible for low-cost student loans, like the Federal Direct Student Loan Program. You're not eligible for the Work-Study Program. Not eligible for any of that. And there are some schools using the FAFSA to determine need-based awards, need-based grants. Not eligible. This is not theory. This is not, a hypothetical. This is not conjecture. FAFSA completion rates from 2023 to 2024 went from 52.2% down to 44.7%. That's almost an 8% drop. That's millions of less FAFSA completers. So millions of more people not eligible for some of the financial aid that's out there, whether it be self-help or whether it be gift aid. It's a major concern. Now, I wanted you to understand what in the world happened. So I asked Erin if she could explain to our listeners what actually happened with the FAFSA, because we talked about it a lot. But I'm going to let Erin really break it down because she lives in that world. And so I want you to hear now Erin Welf breaking down what actually happened last year with the FAFSA.
Let's talk about the FAFSA. Just for our listeners today, kind of to take a step back, this has been quite the year in terms of the FAFSA availability to our students and families, but also just the amount of work to prepare the financial aid awards based on some of the things we've seen. But to take a step back, just back in 2020, Congress had initially passed legislation that would simplify the FAFSA form with far fewer questions and more family financial information pulled directly from the IRS rather than families having to input that information into the system. We could tell back in 2022 that this was going to be a big lift for the Department of Education. And as we found earlier this year in 2023, the launch of the new FAFSA was delayed. And when it finally came online in very late December 31st, in to be exact, really it was riddled with technical glitches. We found students from mixed family statuses with maybe one or both parents who don't have Social Security numbers faced with really the biggest hurdles. Workarounds for students that have been used for years, such as entering all zeros in the place of a Social Security number, no longer worked. And for weeks, there was really no way for these students, most of them U.S. citizens, to add their parents' financial information. Also, later in March, we had announced that some information was fixed, but there were still issues and things that our families were encountering. We also knew that there was other glitches in the way the data was being pulled from the IRS. On the school side, families wouldn't know, but if the federal government lifted up a huge change to the FAFSA, it also impacted all of the systems that they use to process the awards and also the transmissions to the schools directly. Required a lot of our software vendors to have to upgrade and adapt their software to fit the new form. And because the information coming out of the federal government was delayed to the software providers, it further delayed our ability to test and really manage the changes in our systems that we had to put in place. With the delays in getting the data to school, it required schools to really look at their admission deadline. Normally, May 1 is the national deadline for which students commit to a university. And so our schools, schools in the landscape were pushing back deadlines to June, some July. Some were withholding their deadlines just based on, their own institutional priorities. So on the school side, many of our families may not know that, if there's an update to the FAFSA application, the federal government also is updating a lot of systems, which caused a lot of delays in the data and the elements that our software providers had to put in place so we could process financial aid. All these things, these are forces outside of, students' control, families' control, and even on the financial aid side, financial aid administrators, learning, new processes, new terminology, and new formulas to award financial aid. With the change, many schools had to push back their deadline for enrollment deposits. Traditionally, that's May 1 on every college campus. And schools were having to decide, if they were really delayed in getting awards out, it's not fair to give a family possibly only a week or 2 weeks to make a decision. So schools were granting that grace to have families be able to put awards side by side and make financial decisions that were best suited for their family. With the delay, it causes a lot of flurry on college campuses too over the summer to even onboard our students based on not knowing enrollment and housing situations to really have our students land on our campuses to be prepared for fall term. The FAFSA was really termed the better FAFSA. Honestly, it was a bit of a fiasco. And kind of looking ahead to this year, we know that obviously the rollout has been plagued with delays and a little bit of mistrust in the process. So the Department of Education did announce in August that the application for the 2025-2026 academic year is going to be pushed back, with it opening by December 1 for the majority, if not all, applicants for college. Hopefully with the pushback, the department will be able to do, some additional testing with the application period. What we understand is that they are going to test, certainly resolve issues before making that form available to all students and contributors. And hopefully using this approach with the department will allow for full functionality when that application does open on December 1. Inevitably, the goal of the phased rollout will be, to have industry best practices with software. And also from what we understand, the Department of Education will be coordinating some of these efforts with particular schools and or students to begin testing this as early as October 1. So we're just a few days out from this application opening up to a small group of students in schools to be able to use it. I do hope that this is a much better rollout this year. It would be probably very embarrassing if this would have some additional failures through the process this year. But I do think that, based on all of the voices that have been impacted from the rollout this year, that we should see hopefully a better process put in place with less bumps and hurdles for our students and families, and certainly the option for our schools to go back to timely release of financial aid information so our families can make decisions for enrollment. Thank you very much for having me again. And, if any other questions pop up, I'm happy to pop in and help with you, Mark. Thanks.
Here's the worst part. People are not confident that it's fixed. People are not confident that it is fixed, and they're expecting to have more of the drama and the trauma and the agina and the angst this year. I mean, we already know FAFSA is already pushed back to December. It's supposed to be open in October. They're pushing back into December. So this is creating a lot of problems, and colleges feel under attack. They feel assailed. And then the last point I want to make on this topic is decreased yield. Now, I never want to assume anybody knows what I'm talking about. We have regular listeners that have known what yield was 40 years ago. We have other people who think I'm talking about something that looks like a stop sign when I say yield. Yield is the percentage of accepted students that enroll. And when you're in admissions and in managing a budget, yield drives the bus. Everything is enrollment. Got to get the right number of heads and beds with the right net tuition revenue. So why is yield down? Well, believe it or not, yield is down because the more people hear that college is hard to get into, which, by the way, it's easier to get into for most students. And I'll be talking to you about that a lot coming up. College is actually easier to get into for most students. But they're not the ones that get the articles in the New York Times and the Washington Post and Forbes and U.S. News and everything. I've had Ron Lieber on this podcast, and I believe I said this once before, so forgive me if you're hearing it a second time. But I once heard Ron Lieber, he's the Financial Times writer on college for the New York Times, financial writer for the New York Times. And he was once asked in a great interview, why are you talking about Harvard so much? I mean, really? Like, such a very, very, very small percentage of people go to Harvard. You guys are always talking about Harvard. And Ron's response was, that may be true, but 30% of our audience is Harvard curious. They either think their kid's getting in or they're Harvard curious. At the end of the day, I need to write stuff that will generate readers. And people are going to click an article if we write on Harvard. Well, what that does is it produces a lot of, disinformation, to be honest. I'm not saying there's not a place for that. I know it's something I wrestle with here on our own podcast. I want to talk about all these different colleges all the time, but I realize if we don't talk about some of the ones people are the most curious or interested in, then people won't listen to the spotlight or, follow the discussion. So it's kind of a healthy balance you have to try to strike. But what it does, all these articles every year, hardest year to get in, record-breaking admission, all this kind of stuff, is it creates this frenzy. And then people feel as if they need to apply to more schools. So they do. They go ahead and they apply to more schools because, believe it or not, the number of applications are up. The number of applications are up because students are applying to a lot more colleges than before. I mean, the data is really, really crystal clear on this. In 2005, 17% of students applied to 7 or more applications. Okay, so 19 years ago, only 1 in 6 applied to 7 schools 19 years ago. Now 39% applied to 7 or more. Okay, 39%, 4 in 10. And by the way, that's just that stat. If we looked at the number applying to 12, 15, 20, those numbers are even higher. So why? The more they hear it's harder to get in, the more they apply. The more they apply, the lower the yield is for a college. Because maybe in the past If we admitted a student, they got into 2 or 3 other schools. Now we admit a student, they're in 8 or 9 other schools. So, of course, the percentage of the time they're going to pick you is lower. But that makes it almost impossible to plan. When I had Gregory Roberts on the podcast in 2019, Gregory's over the admission office at UVA, he talked about over-enrolling by quite a few students. And he said, I'm not smart enough to figure this thing out. Like, we're literally bringing data science people into our office to try to figure out how many people do we have to admit to get the number we need to get. There have been a lot of stories about over-enrollment. We've talked about them over the years. UC Irvine had massive over-enrollment, Tampa. But then there's also, under-enrollment's really bad. Because then you miss your budget. So this has led to colleges doing all kinds of different things, right? Because if your yield goes down, then you have to do one of a couple of things. You either need to increase your number of applicants to make up for the lower yield, or you have to try to find ways to make your yield go up. So that's why you see more emphasis on things like early decision moving into the public schools now. I had a chance to talk to Vern Granger, who's the director of undergraduate admission at UConn. I got the chance to talk to his boss, the VP of enrollment at UConn, on this trip, just for about 20 minutes. Casually. Wasn't a meeting. In fact, I have to tell you guys this story. It's so embarrassing. I saw someone I've known for over 20 years. His name's Kevin Hudson. In fact, back when I was at Westtown, our very first college fair in 2005, Kevin Hudson was one of our keynote speakers. He used to be in admissions at Princeton, and then he went into the CBO world, and we've kept in touch. So I see Kevin Hudson talking to a guy. Hey, Kevin, we get to talking. And he introduces me, to someone. And he says, hey, you guys know each other? And I'm like, no. And he's like, Mark, he's at UConn. And so I'm thinking Vern Granger. He works for Vern. Vern runs the office. Vern's a bigwig at NACAC. So I say, hey, I know your boss. And Kevin says, I don't think you know his boss. So it turns out, this is Vern's boss. I'm sitting here talking to Nathan, who's the boss of Vern, saying, hey, I know your boss. Anyway, insert open, what's that saying? Open mouth, insert foot. Fortunately, he was chill about it. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. The point is, I had a conversation. Why are you guys going to early decision? And one of the things that came up is that early action just wasn't helping them predict yield anymore. They were not getting any more of a predictive read off early action than they were off of regular decision. So you put a new tool in. Vermont, another public school going to early decision. Look at all the schools that have added ED2 over the last few years. There's quite a few of them. Boston College added ED1 and ED2. Carnegie Mellon, Rice, we could go on. Okay? So adding ED is one option, putting more emphasis on sophisticated ways of using DI, demonstrated engagement, demonstrated interest, to try to figure out who's coming. Another thing is these guaranteed admission plans, which I want to talk to you guys a little bit more about in other upcoming episodes. But, I'm talking about the percentage plans. Like, I listened to a conversation with the VP of enrollment at South Carolina. He did a presentation, and I got a chance to talk to him afterward. Now, this will show you the challenges that colleges face. So you would think you've brought somebody all the way through this process, right? You've sent them mail, direct mail, and you've got them to come to your campus. You've moved them from a prospect to an inquiry. And then you got them to submit an application. All right? And then that applicant was admitted. And then you got them to enroll. You're thinking it's all over. And then not only did you get them to enroll, you get them to come to your orientation. So I'm talking to the VP of enrollment at South Carolina because he said something in a presentation that really caught my attention. He said, at our orientation this year, we asked a question we don't normally ask. We said, how many of you have gone to at least one other orientation? This is orientation for students who are about to matriculate. We've talked before about not doing double deposits, right? He said more than 200 people say they had been to an orientation at another college. And then he made the point. That's just the ones that admitted it. What about the ones that didn't admit it? So even when you think you have somebody and you're at orientation, they still might melt away on you because they may be going on multiple orientations. That's the yield pressure that colleges face. But one thing he also went on to say was how much the new South Carolina plan, where top 10% of students are automatically getting in. And he said, we added a wrinkle. If you make under $80,000, no tuition and fees. And he said, we had an increase in more than 1,000 people just in year one with that plan. And so colleges have to get creative and using these mandatory guaranteed percent plans, right? So Scott Verzel, and I talked to him because he might come on the podcast. We're in conversations about having him come on the podcast to talk about this. But the bottom line is these top 10% plans or top 5% plans, Wisconsin's gone to top 5%, and now Texas has went from top 6 to top 5, and Tennessee's got a plan. Like these plans can be very effective. I've got a date on my calendar right now to interview the VP of Enrollment at the University of Tennessee on November 8th or November 9th. And I'm going to talk to him. This is one of the things I'm going to talk to him about. Fabrizio is his name. I'm going to talk to him about how this plan is playing out in Tennessee. But the point being, colleges are seeing their yield go down. And once again, this is a fact. This is a statistical fact. If you look at the yields about 10 years ago, 2014, 36.1% was the yield. Now the yield's 30.1. That may not seem like a lot to you, but it's actually a really big deal. That's thousands of students. Okay? I mean, think about it. Think about it depending on how many kids you have to admit. If you're at a bigger school, think about if the fact that you're getting 3 out of 10 and you got to admit 10,000 to get 3,000, versus in the past, if you admitted 10,000, you got 3,600. That's a difference of 600 kids. So anyway, I just want you to see 7 of the forces that are coming together, the confluence of all of them converging all at one time to put incredible pressure on colleges. And to me, that was a single number one theme that ran throughout the whole conference. And you would see a lot of things around solutions for this, programs, things you can do to address it. But the overall elephant in the room was colleges are under attack. I mean, how many colleges out there are not at their pre-pandemic numbers for enrollment? The majority of them are not at their pre-pandemic enrollment numbers. So anyway, I know this was a little bit gloom and doom, and I hate that, but I also want to keep it real with you guys. Hopefully you at least found this illuminating and helpful. We'll now transition to Aaron Wolf, and we'll just talk about a range of topics related to money. I hope you guys find it helpful.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends, in our final segment, we don't cover any more reasons, but we do talk about a potpourri of topics related to financial aid paying for college. I asked Aaron if families can trust net price calculators. Aaron talks about how some schools do an early read. Aaron talks about what my intuition is. Aaron talks about what families should do with these complex situations. Aaron talks about, does it make a difference if the family is difficult to work with when you're deciding how much money to give out? Aaron talks about what full verification is. I ask Aaron if she has a preference between the student or the parent taking the lead when it comes to raising concerns about an aid award. And finally, Aaron goes on the hot seat in our lightning round. Listen to the final part of my interview with Aaron Wolf, Director of Financial Aid at Bucknell University. Which of the things that we've talked about do you feel a net price calculator captures? Like most of it, some of it, not most of it, because net price calculators, they're really presented as, you can have confidence that we're going to meet your need. If you're trying to figure out if you're going to apply ED, just do the net price calculator. That's oftentimes the admission spiel.
Yeah, if only you could see my face.
I see your face. We're on video over here.
I
Our listeners
know.
aren't, but I see your face.
The net price calculators serve a purpose to a point. They're every school is mandated to have a net price calculator. I'll say that. As I've been looking at colleges, with my son, going out to look at net price calculators, I see that sometimes they're not always updated, and it could be 4 or 5 years old with tuition and, referenced and whatnot. And so, a school is required to have a calculator, but to the level and detail of what you're learning in the calculator, that's where there's, can be some concern. Just even on, I'm speaking as a financial aid administrator, and they're complicated to from the school side. If you have to go in and build one to make it really replicate your policy, if you want it to be fully replicated. The challenge is for a school that is providing merit, that calculator may not be determining what a merit scholarship should be. So sometimes we hear from families who are confused because they run the NPC, as we call it, net price calculator, and then they're like, well, wait, there's a difference. Well, they may not really be different, but they might be based on need, and so it's a need-based award that was spit out through the net price calculator. The challenge also with a net price calculator is you can't see the components that the family entered in the calculator. So I can't see an output of, did they really list their adjusted gross income correctly? Did they use taxes paid, the line item that we're using? Did they list their untaxed income, what we talked about? That is not on the FAFSA, but we may care about institutionally. So there could be a disparity in the information, and then those make for some challenging calls when a family is like, nope, it says this, and this is what we expect. And it's like, well, this is supposed to be, a baseline. Some schools may go as far, and I'm, again, friends, sorry if, some schools may really say to a family, listen, we have the ability to do a couple early reads. We can work with you, and they might help a family that way if they're really considering early decision. If they're concerned, they're asking a lot of questions, we really need to assess the financial strength to know what the financial aid award is before that family goes down that path. Some schools use My Intuition, which is a net price calculator. That's a little different than some of the other calculators that exist. It's meant to give families a range. Not all schools use My Intuition. There's a small subset that do. We are participating with My Intuition. So it gives family kind of a range based on income. It asks only maybe 4 or 5 questions. So it's quick, and it's meant to be like, oh, okay, I see I could fall into these ranges. And then that's where families may have some follow-up questions that we can work together to really unpack what the awards would look like, if your student's planning to apply. So again, net price calculators can be very helpful, but I caution, make sure the information you're putting in there is really accurate and represent your tax situation. Know that merit may not be something that the school can put in the calculator. So some schools may have that, it may replace need-based dollars, or perhaps they stack their merit scholarships. Again, all dependent on the policies and philosophy of the school. So, we always say if you have questions, call the financial aid office.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask what's a family to do, because this is pretty complicated. And if somebody starts out looking at, let's just throw out a number, 12 to 15 schools, to do this for all their schools and to get answers. I mean, I even told you as a counselor, I've been shut down asking for what the home, equity multiplier is as a counselor talking to people. I've got shut out on that. So, and when I say I was shut down, that was while having lunch with a financial aid professional, an environment where you would expect that someone would be transparent with how the school uses their home equity multiplier to assess home equity and how it will impact the parent contribution. Not everybody, some schools will share it, but some don't. And so, what is a family to do, especially for early decision? Because for regular admission, you can say, I'll apply and then I'll see what aid award I got, and I can take it into consideration, what they're asking me to pay. I may not understand how the sausage was made, but I know what 30,000 is. I know what 45,000 is. I know what 60,000 is. I can just make my decision with the numbers in mind. Like, what is a family to do? What are your thoughts, especially for early decision?
Yeah, I mean, and that's where, as I tell my families, if you're really going down this path, call us and let's talk through it, and then we'll see what the staffing is like for us to take some early reads, to get a family a glimpse of what their award can be. I can't speak to what capacity other financial aid offices have. Many of those schools might say use our net price calculator, and they might have language that might say, we've really worked hard to make sure this replicates our awarding structure. And so you have to trust at face value what they're telling you. I believe we're all really good, honest people in the financial aid office trying to make this an option for students to look at our university. So we want to work as much as we can with families. So I think having those honest conversations is the first place, and to see what they do offer as a resource, to really understand. Some may say, if they're a merit heavy school and it's like, hey, if you know your essay, if they require SATs, or if SATs are optional and students are going to report, or if they look at GPA as a driver for merit, they might say, hey, go online and you can see what you're going to qualify for just based on the metrics that you have on your students' transcripts, and that can give you an idea of X, Y, and Z scholarship. I mean, it could be as something like that, but again, I would say families should not hesitate reaching out to the financial aid offices. They might be better served. Mark, you may have represented families, but they might no, I want to talk to the student, and I want a waiver to know that they're on the phone with you to, as we walk through the questions that they have. And again, they're just in providing the most, hopefully, transparent information to our family. They're willing to walk through what the ED process would look like, and what the award may entail before they make that commitment.
How much of a difference does it make, Erin, if you're working with a family and one family's sweet as pie and the other family is entitled and angry?
I would say from the financial aid staff here, we will smile through any difficult conversation, and I expect the same level of customer service. But from my staff, there are days that are very challenging because, like I said, money's a difficult topic. And we certainly have a lot of situations that, we again are empathetic about, but there's sometimes there is a limit to what we can do. And, that's where it's difficult. And, we sometimes, we have to agree to disagree, and we can only work with a family to the point that, they may, hopefully they're happy, but sometimes, there's just the difficulty of knowing what a family's out of pocket might be. That's a challenge. And, my staff will smile through anything. There are, I always say, there are days where I'm like, how did you get through that call? And some calls can last an hour. I mean, and we don't limit people. We have, most like any other school, you have someone on the phone. It's in difficult times or busy times of the year, it's difficult to get us on the phone. So once they have us, they're going to go through every question, and I respect that, and I would expect that.
Now, are you familiar? Do you know Ron Lieber? Are you familiar with him? He wrote the book, The Price You Pay for College. I know you're so into the financial aid world. You might not be familiar with him or not.
I'm not familiar with him. I've heard of the book, and probably have read excerpts from it over my time, but I have not met him.
I brought him up. He's like a money columnist for the New York Times. We've had him on the podcast, and he's a real passionate advocate for schools doing full tax return reviews, especially for early decision. He's like, how in the world can you ask somebody to pay what's likely to be $100,000 after taxes at some of these schools by the time somebody's a senior with 3 to 5% increases, and they don't know what they're going to pay? Like, that's just unconscionable. And his belief is, if you tell me you don't have enough staff, well, schools, raise your tuition if you need to, but you need to have enough staff to do that. And he's extolled schools like, College of Worcester and Whitman, and some schools that are doing that. Some schools do it for ED. Some schools do it as part of their policy. But then there's an argument on the other side of, do you realize what kind of manpower that would take? What are your thoughts on that on that question?
I fully agree that to the level of capacity, like it's better. I feel to be transparent and offer the best financial aid award, whether or not a family agrees that it might be. We do full verification, and that may seem a barrier for some to get their financial aid application
Why don't you
complete.
tell people what full verification is? Because I think some people might not
Full
know what you're talking
verification
about.
is where we're seeking a copy of the parent tax returns, W-2s. If student has them, we don't require them necessarily for student, but we are getting a copy of the full tax return. And again, not that we don't expect the FAFSA to be correct, but we're going through and making sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and that all things are accounted for as they should. And we are, looking at all those untaxed income elements, again, to be, equitable across the board. And so that is a part, because I think the last thing we want to do is have a family apply. And then if we come back later and say, oh, we need to collect tax documents 6 months after you've applied because you've deposited, and we find something that is a surprise, that's not a real great conversation to want to change the financial aid for someone who's committed to an institution. So there is a part of that we've gone through to make sure, again, I want to qualify people for as much federal aid as I can. We want to go through the process of looking at all of those data points that a family has to really make sure that we've measured all things accurately.
When it comes to appeals, Erin, do you want the student to do that? Do you want the parent to do that? Because this stuff's really complicated and students don't know what they're talking about, but yet it's the student who is coming and you want their investment. Do you want them both to do it? Like, what's your advice on who should be taking the lead, student or parent, when it comes to an appeal?
Either way, from my perspective, it doesn't matter to me who raises their hand. I'm glad to hear if they're raising their hand, they have an investment in the school as well, and they definitely are, have an interest in our institution. And so, I mean, with no application fees at a lot of schools now, you just don't know who's really interested in your school too. So, with a student or parent raising their hand, even if it is the student, we'll say, okay, they might provide a very good picture of what's going on in their household. And so we'll say to the student, oh, this is what we need from your family. And the students are very responsible and work with their families, or we might pick up the phone and make a call and say, we've learned this through an email that you've sent to us, and can you tell us more? And that's okay. I honestly don't care who raises their hand. To me, it's at least they're acknowledging that there's something going on that we may not have picked up in the first round. And so let's have the conversation. Can't always promise we can work within every situation in a way someone would like us to, but we will absolutely review information, honor the request to do that, and see what comes out in the end.
All right, Erin, we're about to wind down, but no first-time guest gets away without going on our hot seat for our lightning round and non-financial aid questions. But before we do, is there anything that you want to say on this topic that we didn't cover?
No, I think this was great, Mark. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and you're making me nervous. What do I need to be prepared for?
All right, first question. What's your favorite type of cuisine? That's not too hard, is it?
Okay, Italian.
Italian, that was easy. Cool. Next, what's your favorite type of music?
I am into definitely rock.
Rock. Who's your favorite, best concert you've ever been to?
Probably not anything like rock of which I would like to go to, but I would
Who'd be your dream concert if you could go? Tickets anywhere.
One of my favorite concerts was U2, but I would love to see Metallica. I'm into some of that heavier metal stuff too. So that's when I'm really getting through financial aid.
Need to get financial aid off your mind.
I am not listening to classical, even though I probably should.
What about a sport? Do you have a favorite sport?
I will say I had a family member who played professional football for the Chiefs, but has since retired.
Nice.
So now I live in Central PA. So
Right.
I came
Adopt
from
a Philly.
I came from the Eagles area, but I married a Steelers fan. So I'm kind of both. Yeah.
Yeah, you're Central PA. You're midpoint.
Yeah. So I have to support both teams.
There you go. Ever the diplomat. How do you relax and unwind?
I run a lot.
Good for you.
Yeah, and I have
You have such a pretty campus too.
Yeah, and walk my 2 dogs. So
Awesome. Final question: what advice do you have for a parent listening? Anything at all? Any advice?
great question. I would say, I think parents might see price points of colleges and be a little petrified. And I will say that, don't let that be a fear. There is ample financially dollars at a lot of schools, and we're going to work with you, again, as best as we can to evaluate your ability and to pay also, but also look at the financial aid formulas and hopefully, again, as schools are continually analyzing their financial aid budgets and their affordability initiatives, that there might be schools that you thought were out of your reach that actually end up being a place where your student can land. So again, explore. The nice part about all of the things we've talked about today is, back in the day when I went to college, we didn't have the ability to see schools through these virtual tours and have podcasts to listen to and explore the whole college environment, college campuses, and just all of these nuances. So there's a lot of information out there, and working with Mark and being a part of this podcast, he's got a lot of great resources that families should definitely check out.
Aaron, this has been awesome. See, you survived the hot seat. That wasn't that bad. I saw you shaking your chair a little bit. What did I get into?
That's right.
But listen, thank you so much. You gave us over an hour and a half of your time, and we are most grateful. And I really, really want to thank you. I think this is going to help a lot of people. We'll have this up on our website, and hopefully it'll live in perpetuity when everybody wants to know, like, why was my aid award all over the place? Or hopefully people educate themselves on the front end too.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great.
Well, thank you. And you take care.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Friends, on Thursday's episode, Julie and I are going to pick up where we left off. So we started talking about the senior year grades matter. Now we're going to talk about something a little different. We're going to talk about, what are you supposed to do if you drop a class senior year? Like, are you supposed to communicate that? Do you communicate that? Does the school counselor communicate that? Do you not communicate that? So we're going to talk about that. And then our roundtable's back. We're finishing up our conversation about video submissions, and then we will continue to have our interview with Jay Rosner. And we're looking at just a bunch of different things you can do if you're going to take the test to get the best score. A range of things you need to think about, like when you start and how do you prep and how long do you prep and how many days a week, and do you take breaks, and do you do, self-prep versus group prep versus one. We talk about all of it. It's part 2 of 4. And then Linda and Lisa will have part 2 of their college spotlight on Furman University in Spartanburg, South Carolina. So we hope you'll join us on Thursday for that. And friends, remember, it's not where you go. It's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there, and it's what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your career success. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stelianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.